we're getting pretty good understanding in the states and acceptance of, understanding of and acceptance for discovery. Now, it's not all done exactly the same way, and actually that's fine. But to me, what is important is that we're not testing, assessing, or comparing people. Indeed, we're doing this approach called discovery. And I don't know, about 5 years ago, I ran across this saying. It was by a gentleman that was conferred the Nobel Prize for Science way back in the 30s. Dr. Georgi had determined that citric acid had vitamin C. It was quite the first time anybody had recognized that. And he was asked to comment on a lot of things, and one was about his discovery. And he argued that discovery consists of looking at the same thing as everyone else and thinking something different. And because too often the people for whom we have an interest in this discussion have been thought not to be able to work, or be able to work only minimally, to look at them from a different perspective is one of the most powerful things we can do. And I love Dr. Georgi's approach on this. Of course, he knew nothing about what we're talking about here, and yet he probably knew everything about it if you think about it that way. You know, just the finding something that you did not expect to see, and just being willing to look in a different way. So what is that different way? And one of the things I need to reach over here. One of the things I would say is that as discovery became necessary, and it did, tests were not yielding the kind of clarity about who people were, no matter how proficient the evaluator might be, no matter what the testing conditions were. If you were comparing people who have an impact of disability in life to some standard or norm, too often there was this great gulf between their performance and the normative performance. And it seems that our field, you know, almost since the beginning of the 20th century, all the way back to the germination of intelligence tests, we just became enamored of making sure that we could classify people based on the difference between their performance and others, and missing the clarity of what people were actually doing. We got so enamored of that distinction of the difference that I think we just stopped looking for, but what about all the very, very competent stuff people do? And competent stuff's often hidden in day-to-day activities and actions by people. We tend to look at the splashy ones of, you know, how did you do on the intelligence test, or how fast you can run the 100-meter dash, or how fast do your hands move on this employment test, those kinds of things, and just missing things that are of great importance. As we began to understand we needed something other than comparison, it wasn't the clearest of concepts to begin to move to, because it seemed that what we were doing, especially vocationally, those services that were directed at helping people get jobs, it seemed that we somehow had to almost protect a potential employer, and we had to reflect what we thought potential employers' demands were. And I know in the States you're always hearing employers asking for all these highly trained, job-ready, multitasking, well-educated job seekers for the jobs that are open. And you know, they're kind of blaming schools and universities and our society if they're not getting those people. And so we responded in the States with even greater testing and evaluation. Right now, virtually every state is, and we got down on ourselves because imagine Australia would be all this distance, you're graduating people from your schools, and gosh, they are way better than our students. So the way to respond to that, of course, is to test more. And we increase the rigor of what we're going to compare, and then we test more rigorously. And now it's everywhere, it just pervades. So imagine if the impact of your disability was on learning and on performance. I mean, you're screwed in this kind of highly competitive situation. And for me, the first thing to do was just to ignore evaluation. Mark Gold, way back in the 60s, across the world was recognized for a simple phrase. Mark Gold, my mentor, who died in 1982, by the way, suggested train, don't test. Train, don't test. In other words, now he used the industrial term of train, but teach, don't test. And he said it again and again and again until it became a mantra. But yet, at least in the States, we kept testing. We kept evaluating. We kept assessing. We kept churning out people whose jobs it would be to test and sort out and exclude. And if you were trying to get around that, the first thing you would do is simply don't test. And what happened with that, while it welcomed more people to the concept of employment, if you don't have any process to help you understand who people are, yeah, you might get them jobs, but you end up like James, the man with autism that I showed you at first. He can have 4 jobs, but he didn't like any of them. Yeah, we saw James as employable, but he's miserable at the jobs we found because we didn't have a way. We were avoiding testing, but we weren't doing anything positive. And the antidote was found, for me at least, and I think now for many people, of something that gets to a distinction in research. Most researchers are what are called quantitative researchers, and they look for meaning in numbers. And numbers have been part of what's worked against people with disabilities over the years. The numbers don't add up. The numbers, their performance numbers aren't what other people's performance numbers are. So therefore, they don't get to do what they want to do because your numbers aren't there. And you can take it right to productivity, where your numbers define your need for a supported or some other kind of assisted wage or sub-minimum wage in our country. We do that. But there's another whole form of research called qualitative research that's more about understanding than it is about being driven by numbers. And that, even though I know for me, I'd had a chance to do doctoral work in the States at Syracuse University, a university known for qualitative research, I was so focused on employment, it didn't occur to me that there were aspects of university knowledge a 2-block walk from where my offices were that I could have used. So we were still looking for ways around. And later, as the concept began to form, it hit me like an epiphany sometimes does. It's like, goodness, right there at Syracuse, all these qualitative researchers. And I went back and I dug out all my old research books and ordered some new ones and started looking at the ways of the social scientist, the ethnographer, the social scientist, people, the anthropologists, who are striving to understand what is going on. And if we could do that, you begin to get into something, as the great anthropologists looked at people that those of us who purport to be educated and civilized feel like, well, I don't really understand these folks, you know. If all we do, if you know, we went to wherever first contact people may still exist in the world, maybe at far reaches of the Amazon basin somewhere, people have not had contact with what we would refer to as Western society. If we went in and just did comparison, we said, let's look at their socioeconomic status and look at ours. I mean, that would be ridiculous. Of course, it'd be self-fulfilling. And what does it tell us, you know? But instead, if we ask some questions like, how do these people manage their health care? How do they go out through a jungle and they're gone days and they come back with food? How do they do that? You know, if it was a question of understanding rather than comparison, then you can begin to find a level of competence that isn't defined by our perspective necessarily, but is clearly something of value and of great meaning. And again, the anthropologist would take on often a people. The focus of a lot of social science is broad. You know, we try to understand aspects of culture or, you know, divisions of culture. Whereas with discovery, we're going to use the same tools and apply them to one person. We're going to take social science and qualitative research and apply it to an N of one, being the individual. And we're going to have to cut some corners because people aren't going to go back and, you know, like I have a more education in so-called special education and rehabilitation than a person ought to have. I'm not going to go back and now get a degree in anthropology or social science. But in fact, we can bring those tools forward because they're basically people tools. And they're very important. It's not that they're simple or simplistic, but that they are straightforward. And it turns out very quickly, we kind of knew this all along. We just didn't have a way of thinking about it and compartmentalizing what we're doing. Now we have a taxonomy. We have a way of saying it and understanding, and it's bona fide. We're not just making it up. It isn't like just being a friend with somebody, you know, just spending time with somebody. It's very, very intentional. And we can teach service providers, we can teach families, we can teach employers actually to begin to see the best in people if we look beyond comparison and get in an area of focus. And as I laid out the concepts of discovery earlier, we're looking at somebody's life, which is this huge vessel of information that we can find. Even if you have the most significant, maybe I'll say that, I was about to say something, let me rephrase it. Especially if you have the most significant impact of disability. In order to understand that person, it's a huge amount of information. There's complexity at every level. There's nuance, subtlety. But then in order to take that forward, we've got to distill that. And discovery is this qualitative approach of understanding who the person is within reason for service delivery. Yeah, I mean, this is not like some lifetime of work to find you one person and you spend a lifetime learning about them. If we do that, then we call that a friendship, maybe. But indeed, if it is a service, we have to be more efficient, more intentional about it, and move forward. And that's fascinating to get to kind of focus what another field has learned that's virtually a perfect fit for our field. And then to get that where we can get that whole person's life more and more focused through the process. And one of the ways of distilling the individual's life through the lens of discovery is to use these three areas of focus. For me, discovery boils down to understanding the person through the perspective of their conditions for success, their interest toward an aspect of, it could be the job market, or you can use discovery for other service outcomes. So then you change interest to things like recreation and other aspects of life. It could be housing. I mean, each of us in this room is unique. I was having a discussion with Jackie coming over here this morning about the distinctions of housing in Australia and in the States. I mean, they're much more similar than they are different, but there are some differences. And, but regardless of our cultural differences, we're a room full of people who have individual differences. And we have different interest in the way our houses look. Right now in the States, we've got this crazy thing called tiny houses, which people think that just in a few square feet that they can actually raise a family. I hope that's the case. I don't think my wife and I could have raised our daughter in a few square feet, but or square meters. But regardless, you hear what I'm saying. Each of us has interest, and depending on what your focus is, your service outcome focus, today it's for employment, we want the interest to be toward the job market, and not in a job title. It's job titles, but if I made the great mistake with James, the man who ended up working in our sheriff's department for 25 years, in his living room, with his mom and dad in the living room, I turned to James as soon as I heard he watches these cop shows all the time. And I said to James, "You want to be a police officer, huh?" Now, folks, that was the worst thing a facilitator of discovery could do, because I've taken what may or may not be an interest, but I've just learned about it, and now I've given it a job title. Think about all the potential exclusionary aspects of the job title police officer. How many people do you know with autism in the middle of the spectrum who are police officers? I'm not talking about Asperger's. I'm not talking about people maybe who might be considered to have autism that maybe don't have a label. But I'm talking about somebody that just, honest to goodness, has the autism that when the term was originally coined, that's what James has got. And it affects his life comprehensively. I don't know of any police officers in my country with autism. So what I've done is I've raised his hopes and literally excluded him. And as soon as it was out of my mouth, I knew that was stupid, Mike. And I tried to erase it, but once it's out, and I said, "James, I'm sorry." And his father beat me to it. His dad was sitting there, and his dad had kind of been acting like, and I speak in generalities a lot, I understand, but us males don't do as well as females, I think, with this whole discovery thing. We got some gender differences that, I want to be out mowing the lawn or out, at a sporting event, and now I'm on a couch with this guy that says he wants to know about my son. Dad didn't look any too happy about being there. And he had been responding in one-word phrases, just not saying much at all about me trying to learn about James. James at that time wasn't using verbal language in a way that was really helpful. So we weren't getting very far, in other words. And as soon as I suggested that James wants to be a police officer, Dad goes, he waxes eloquent. He said, "Oh my God," he said. Mr. Professional, he had a label for me. Mr. Professional, he called me. "You sit here and you tell my son with autism you're going to get him a job as a police officer." And he was right. Dad was right, that I had done what we do wrong in employment so often. I had distilled all of James's interest and dreams, etc., into this job title. And now, because I've put it on the table, I've either now got to show him how he's not qualified to be a police officer, or do what I did, which was apologize. I said, James, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your dad's right. And his face, and I know his heart just fell, you know? And then I said, this is what I should have said. Are you telling me you have an interest in police work? And his dad again goes, oh, no, you. And it's like, sir, I'm sorry. Your son has a right to an interest in police work. And we can actually, this was before he goes to work, we can actually work to get him a job in police work because that's an interest that now we can make sure that he has, that it's worth getting up in the morning, that he won't walk out in 2 weeks or 2 months, and he hasn't. I mean, James's only time of getting written up by his employer for a behavioral incident occurred on the first year anniversary of his work, when our county was having some financial problems, as counties sometimes will. And you had to take all of your holiday accrued vacation in the same year of service. You couldn't extend it. Mostly in the States, you can carry it over and take some next year if you don't use it this year. But in this county, you had to take it all. So James's first year anniversary was coming up. He had to take a vacation. And it was Monday of his vacation week, and he came in. And the sheriff said, James, you can't be here. You got to go home. So he sent James home. Tuesday, James showed up. And the sheriff brought him in and wrote him up and said, look, this is going in your personnel file. James, you cannot come to work. Send him home. When he came in on Wednesday, James got chewed out as only a fat southern sheriff with a gun in the United States. Every one of the stereotypes you have ever seen on television comes true. And James got what we would refer to as a dog cussing. I mean, it was awful. And you wouldn't want to do that to a dog, I understand. But James, he heard in no uncertain terms, son, do not come back to work. That's the only time James ever got in trouble. He heard the sheriff on the third day, stayed home for the rest of the week. So, you know, something tells me that he has an intrinsic interest in police work. You know, that it really is not just mom getting up saying, son, you got to get up now, come on. He's going to be there regardless. When we have work like that, it just does not feel like work, you know, and we're making money, you know, and we have a career. And it's just so nice. We got to know these three aspects. We have to know what we contribute, what our interests are, and what our conditions are. And each of these is a very important part of discovery. Now, we play these out in a set of qualitative interactions. Now, I'm going to move forward through these. We play these out if you want to, you don't have to buy our book. All you have to do is pull up qualitative research, pull up anthropology. And what you're going to find are a set of human interactions. And we use almost all of them in discovery. One of the most powerful is we want to be where people lead their lives. And the place most of us spend the most time is at home. So discovery is an activity that's grounded in the place where people live. Although we certainly do have to have concern about people allowing us access into their home. I'm careful, even with the term of art. I refuse to say home visit. Home visit has every connotation of a bureaucratically required monitoring visit of your living situation. Whereas visit to your home sounds like that you get to decide if I can be there, and I'm there totally at your willingness and pleasure. And if I'm careful about it and I'm visiting your home, then you're in total control of me being there. And even in the language we use. So I want to be in a person's home, and I want to talk. I want to, for some people it might feel a little more like interviewing, but actually for family members and friends and all those people who support and just know the person the best, I want it to feel like a conversation with this subtle interview structure that is not apparent at all. The last thing I would do. Okay, let's see. Next question here is, tell me about the activity you do most often during a day. If you start interviewing like that, you're going to get interview responses. You know, it's like you're at a physician's office and they're asking you that whole list of things that you ever had, and you're not paying any attention. You're just checking yes or no and hope that the doctor doesn't ask any deep questions about that stuff. But this is not that. So our verbal style has got to be not only respectful, but comfortable in a way that people say, I want to tell you about my life. And then we want to, you know, Margaret Mead spent a lot of time down this part of the world, and she was always troubled by the issue. I'm with this group of people I'm trying to understand. Do I stay outside the dance and try to understand it, or do I join the dance if I'm asked? And do I mess it up? That's an interesting question for us to deal with. So in a person's life, during qualitative research, during discovery, you're going to have to be asking yourself, do I observe this activity? And if I observe, it's not like some spy camera observation. It's with full permission and disclosure. People know why you're observing, but it doesn't fit for you to be part of it. Or then in another activity, to consider, should I be part of the activity and actually embrace and be as a colleague, and my role as a colleague? And rather than do either or, do the one that best fits the circumstance. And even in that scenario, you can have differences. The fact that you thought about it is the respect that people need to have. And then in discovery, we want to be with people very intentionally toward the end of discovery. We want to be with people where they're at their best and most comfortable. Whoever, in no evaluation I've ever been a part of, asked a person, where do you feel most confident, most competent, most comfortable? I want to know you there, because if your work could have any aspect of that in it, I get this crystal ball of just how good work could be for you. And similarly, we ask people, we'd like you to think of something that you've never done, but that you might like to do, that would fit who you are. We want to see people in a novel circumstance. And one of the reasons for that is every first day of work is a novel circumstance for every human being. The first day of work for all of us is new. And if you get to see a person in a novel circumstance that fits who they are, you have some sense of the support needs that they might have, some of the things to really watch for and to be prepared for, and to be set up to respond to. Again, you're not evaluating, you're just learning from the person. And then we do one thing that turns social science on its head. Most social scientists start with the permanent record. If there's any information about what you're about to do, they pour through it and learn as much as they can in advance. And in discovery, we've learned to do the opposite. That is, the permanent record rarely has positive information about the people we're concerned about. And for years in discovery, we refused to look at the permanent record because of that negative perspective. But anymore, and especially I don't have time for the stories that I made the mistake of being hard-headed about this and paid for it. I should have known. In fact, people looking at me going, Mike, why didn't you know? And I said, I don't believe in looking at that information. Well, you're getting to deal with it right now, aren't you? And I go, yes, you are. I may be rethinking my position. So now we do recommend that you look at the permanent record, but only after you've inoculated yourself with the relationship of the individual. Because that way, that's the only way to assure that in discovery, no matter what you learn, you start with an A and you end with an A. You can't fail it. Any evaluation, most evaluations by their very nature are failed by the individual. But in discovery, it's impossible to fail. Who are you? Even if who you are is nice and complex and challenging, difficult, still don't fail it. Because another perspective of discovery, we have an optimistic perspective about the concept. So what I'm trying to cover in this little aspect of what I'm talking about is that discovery is a set of intentional interactions with the person. Our evidence-based data would say that it's about, on average, and this is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds going into the thousands of people that we've got this evidence-based data on, 35 hours a week of interaction, 35 hours of total time over approximately 5 weeks. Now, actually, we're not at enemy with our friends, the quantitative researchers. They help us. We do quantitative research on a qualitative process. We want you to know how long to take. So if you're into average, the statistical average, it's about 35 hours with a range between about 30 and 45 hours. And length of total time, about 4 weeks to 6 weeks with an average of 5 weeks. And by the way, that can be converted, whether it is a federal or state funding system wanting to know how much should this service be worth, or whether you're a family trying to figure out how much is reasonable to pay, or if you are a service provider trying to figure out how to think about charging, you need this data to think about it. And we put all that together and you can have a necessary service paid for at a reasonable rate, done in a reasonable amount of time. All of that's necessary in order to pull discovery off well. If it's done too quickly, we don't have one bit of data that says hot-boxed discovery works. You can't do it in 3 days. Just can't do it. And if you do it in a year, somebody's just not getting the job done. I'm sorry. You can be more intentional than that. You gotta move on with it. Discovery fits customization because without it, we don't know who the person is. And I think any definition of customization would say it's about the person. So how do we know who the person is without discovery?